Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hi there. You found Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read along Wheel of Time podcast. If this is your first episode, what are you doing here? Go back and start at the beginning, because we are talking about chapter 32 and chapter 33 of the book The Fires of Heaven, book 5 in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time saga. And it will make very little sense to you unless you've worked your way here organically.
If it is your first episode, I do want to point out you would also have to check the name of the book like Greg just did while doing his introduction.
Technically, I was checking which number it was, just so that we're honest. Hey, who's that know-it-all? It's Tylor. Tylor, how's it going?
It's going very well. This has been a interesting time of upheaval and change and horrible things in the real world that I want to ignore. And boy, did these two chapters give me some fun things to focus on instead of the real things in the real world that I would like to ignore. I don't think we've done an official temperature check in a few weeks, even though kind of our thoughts about whether things are fast or slow often bleed into our conversation. I want to take right now as an opportunity to do a real temperature check. How are you feeling about this book? Are you disappointed? We are past halfway and it still feels a little bit like setup. Are you starting to feel momentum? Where are you at this moment?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, but how do you feel? So I would say I get a lot of flack on my Letterboxd account. It's at Ion Cannon. Please follow me. Because I think when I go watch movies, I kind of default to a 4 out of 5.
Okay.
And then movies can lose me. It is possible. I go down from there. Or they can win me over and tell me, no, this is actually something really special and get up to 4.5 or 5. So my little letterbox curve is a little slanted. I think a lot of people would say on a scale of 5, you should default to a 2.5 and kind of let films earn every step above that. So I would say if I defaulted to a 4 stars out of 5 on this book, I would say it hasn't really won me over yet. So I'm not saying I'm in the 2 or the 1 territory, but I'd probably say I'm in the 3.5 territory. That, I'm not, you asked, I think you used the word disappointment somewhere in your question. I'm not disappointed and I'm not frustrated because I've read these books and I know the promise is that the last part, the last third usually will be pretty incredible. And I'm still eagerly anticipating that and hoping this goes up in my estimation. But I think 3.5 stars, that's about my temperature, just to mix metaphors fully.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what we need, is as many metaphors as possible crammed in here. So your roller coaster powder keg, 3.5 on the speed meter. Excellent. So I guess what I'm curious about then is these two chapters in particular. Did you find these to be the same sort of setup and hint at chapters that we've been describing a lot of, or was there a change here where it still maybe wasn't gripping you and bringing it back up to that 4-star level, but was there something different about this, or did you feel a little more kind of same like we've been getting?
Well, I have very different feelings about the two chapters in light of that question. So I would say, and I'll keep it broad because I know we have some people who listen one at a time. I will say for chapter 32, A Short Spear, this felt like a classic Robert Jordan non sequitur chapter where it's like he's putting a flag down for us to come find in a couple books. And so he just wants to remind us of some things and kind of get us thinking in that direction. I think we've made this comparison before, but, I love modern Doctor Who, and there are just those episodes that feel like totally standalone, but they throw in one scene or one line of dialogue that's like, but we're still advancing a big plot. And this felt much more like that. Like, this chapter wasn't meant to clearly advance this book, but I assume set up book 6, 7, 8 somewhere down the line. Yeah. Whereas then 33, I will say, just kind of felt like more of what we've been getting lately, which is, kind of ticking up that hill. I thought we had some hints that some of my hypotheses might come to be true, although maybe some hints that they are not going to come true. But it kind of was more of the same and didn't really excite me. Of the two, I preferred the first one, even though it's like seeing a Christmas present where you're like, what the heck is that shape? Like, you don't know what it is or why. You're like, what? An octagon cylinder? I didn't ask for anything like that, but okay. Like, I can't wait to see what that will be in a few weeks at Christmas or whenever we're recording.
I love that metaphor for no reason other than about a third of the time that happened in my life, I would get a really elaborate story about what that thing was, and then it turned out to just be like a DVD in a basketball case that needed to fit weird. Chapter 32, A Short Spear, feels like a pretty good way to transition out of that, because I was never going to find a better transition. Rand seizes Sidene as Aviendha divides the blankets among them. Rand is assigned more blankets despite the fact that he is protesting otherwise. He is surprised that her kind of lingering anger is no longer seemingly there, and then he worries for a moment when she says that she will never sleep with him or have any real contact with him again. He seems somewhat disappointed by this. As they start to go outside, the time doesn't match, and he thinks they must be very far from Cairhien because the sun is up at a time when it really shouldn't be. He uses his sidine to cut a hole in the igloo, and then as he emerges, he sees a flying lizard with a number of people on its back, and he says that they will need to be stealthy, and Aviendha agrees, again surprising him because she seemingly argues about everything before this. As they make their way out of the igloo, he is shocked to see that they are near an ocean and that the sun is setting, and the sun is rising, and he sees that the sun is rising on the east side of a continent, which is not something he has ever experienced before, and both him and Aviendha are wondering at the sight, although she is very clearly more impressed by the ocean than the position of the sun. At this point, they start to make their way through the snow, and he realizes that he won't be able to melt the snow the way he did to get here, because that would make a clear path for the people on the lizard to follow, and so as a result, they kind of have to slowly work their way through the snow, and it's relatively difficult going. Once they get close to the gateway, he sees 4 mounted women, clearly 2 Suldam and 2 Damane, and about 20 Shan-Chan soldiers, along with one individual who is clearly in charge of them. Rand realizes that they are Shan-Chan, and they make a plan for Aviendha to shield the women and capture them in flows of air, while Rand will bind all of the men in flows of air. At this point, Rand executes the plan relatively quickly, and somehow it goes off without a hitch, and then Rand recognizes that one of the bound women is Shan-Chan nobility, and as he begins trying to free one of the Damane using Saidar, that causes them pain, and then the Shan-Chan noblewoman begins to talk to him. We learn that she was apparently at Falm and recognizes Rand, and then we also learn that the news of the defeat of the Shan-Chan at Falm has been suppressed on this continent, apparently violently. Rand seems confused by the conversation between the women, but eventually learns that what is known as the return of the Shan-Chan has been delayed at least some, and that Rand has a reprieve until the Shan-Chan will return in force. Rand worries about the weaves that he used on the gateway, and also a new weave that seems to have appeared that makes the other side of the gateway look gray instead of him being able to see the room on the other side. And then we get a bit of conversation where 2 of the individuals individuals, including the noble who was threatening Rand, begin to threaten one another, and we learn that one of them is a seeker of the truth who will put the other and her damane to the question. Rand eventually convinces Aviendha that they need to go quickly, even if they can't free the damane, and they step through the gateway, not sure what is coming. When they emerge on the room on the other side, Rand immediately shields Asmodean, who is waiting there, and then when he turns, he is surprised not to see the gateway until he realizes that it is an illusion, and then he cuts through the illusion and closes the gateway, narrowly avoiding being hit by a thrown spear, which is cut off at approximately the midpoint. Rand, Rand thinks he is lucky that the damane didn't recover in time, but Aviendha says she didn't release them at all, and she says he needs to be harder with his enemies because they will kill him if he is not. She accuses him of being attracted to the woman who he was talking to among the Shan-Chan, and he says that he should have questioned her about Shan-Chan, and she seems to accept that. And then she also says that she thinks that he is not done with them, and he agrees. And then he says she should go elsewhere for the night, and she agrees to do so. Apparently, Asmodean reveals that the Maidens of the Spear came to check on him, and he said that Aviendha and Rand needed time together, which apparently created quite the commotion among the Maidens, much to Aviendha's chagrin, and she eventually leaves. Rand then threatens Asmodean with his new scepter, as he calls it, telling him that for not telling him about the ability to make illusions in the one that he made in this room. Rand doesn't seem to be distracted by the detail that Asmodean let slip, that only 3 or 4 people could hold a gateway open, including Lews Therin, and then at this point Asmodean begins begging, saying that today he showed loyalty by sticking up for Rand and not betraying him. Rand tells him to teach him 2 things that he doesn't ask for every 1 thing that he does, and then demands that Asmodean try to teach him how to dodge channeling he cannot see. Asmodean says it will be difficult, but Rand says he must try very hard. This is a really interesting chapter because, as you said, it is very much the out-of-nowhere left-field chapter that we've somehow come to expect a little bit. What did you think of what I kind of expected to be a big confrontation and turned into a really quick fizzle?
First, I have to say, illusions, Tylor. A trick is something a whore does for money. Because you said the word illusions like 4 times, and every time I thought of Job in my head. Yes, this is weird and yet not totally unexpected, because we often get this kind of, like I called it in the intro, this marker of, like, this is going to continue to be a plot. And, you know, the most comparable thing from what I've read, and I haven't really ever read fantasy, is that I think of this like Game of Thrones. And the show did this a little differently at times. But, you know, in Game of Thrones, the book series, it was kind of clear that the White Walkers were always like the final big boss that was going to come and threaten everything, and they just kept kind of ticking away and growing powerful. And you know, a lot of people suggest in the books that they're kind of a metaphor for climate change, which I like in terms of this conversation, that it's like we can do whatever we want fighting in our little castles, but the big problems are coming, and you know, the world's going to end. So it does feel like that again, I mean, Rand is very clear, the book is very clear, like, oh, the return has been delayed, so it's going to be a little while.
So I guess my question for you then is, what in this chapter grabs and excites you? Because the story you're telling, I think, is exactly right. This is a chapter that flags us for what is coming next, and it's a thing that we already knew was coming next. And so I'm kind of struggling for, other than, wow, we're on Shan-Chan, what is the piece here that I think we're supposed to pull out of it, right? I think there's a lot of like intricate little details going on between the different Shan-Chan women as they're discussing things, but figuring out what from there is important, I'm not sure what I can do other than just like tell you what's important, and that's less fun.
I would say what stuck out to me the most is the fact that politics are unsettled on this continent. The Shan-Chan, you know, we saw some jockeying, as I recall, amongst the Shan-Chan kind of nobility in Falm, but I did feel like this was really being clear that, you know, information is being suppressed. They don't speak out against the emperor, and emperor or empress. Which word do they use? Empress, sorry, yes. And so it's clear that, when you hear oppressive regimes like that, that there's probably something else going on here, and there's more unrest here.
Yeah.
And, before we talked about how, seemingly the placement of these continents, this would be more towards America and like what is going on here in this fake futuristic America. So that's one. That's number one. And then number two will just be the Shan-Chan continue to intrigue me because they are the most fantastical of who we encounter here, right?
Yeah.
Like they have fancy creatures, which if this is our Earth society, it seems strange that, they have these, one would assume like genetically modified creatures of some kind. I mean, they kind of look like, Earth creatures, but seem beyond it. And so here we have a flying beast. I guess my thoughts naturally go to, is it a beast? I recently rewatched cinematic masterpiece Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And not to spoil the end of that movie, but there's a whole sequence about airplanes that get misread by a society as dragons. And so it's like, oh, these are dragons attacking, but no, they were actually just, airplanes with machine guns that felt like fire-breathing dragons to said society.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting way of thinking about, like, what would this look like to Rand or to Aviendha, who have absolutely no context for it. The thing that came to my mind is actually a video game that I know you enjoy, even though you don't normally play a ton of video games. You tend to do a few of them really long, as opposed to a lot of them, is my understanding. The Jedi Fallen Order games have an extended sequence of riding around on the backs of giant flying creatures, and that is all I can picture when I think of the Shan-Chan on these creatures in this, is that kind of image of not just big flying things, but big flying things that are designed or bred to be ridden, I think is something that we don't see as much as we could, except, as you say, in literature where we get like riding dragon stories. And so in a world that doesn't know what a dragon is, the question I'm kind of left with is how dragony are these things actually?
Yes. And again, I think, it's really easy for me as a reader to just like forget this is our world. And it's like whenever you give us those insights, I believe a long time ago you said Neil Armstrong was riding an eagle or some such. There was a kind of prophecy like that. So it's like, well, we know there's this kind of gray area between creatures and machines in the mix here. But I again, just as a reader, it's like I forget that. I just assume this is some fantasy world and doesn't have any connection to our planet and our society. So it's very weird and just a little jarring when we get reminders that like, oh right, this could just be some ladies on a hang glider, just pure California.
I think my favorite version of that we actually get in the next chapter, where we get some like weird overlaps between real history and science after getting Shan-Chan, which feels just so incredibly fantastical. So we'll get to that when we get there. I don't know how much else I can add to the Shan-Chan conversation without explicitly calling out details. I will say I think you noted all of the ones that I would have, other than potentially we get this mention of the Seekers of Truth, which came up a couple of books ago as kind of the motivation for why people were still hiding the secret of the Shan-Chan, or of the Suldam and the Damane both being able to channel. So the fact that that is being suppressed here, I think we should be thinking about those Seekers of Truth as something to be tracking whenever the Shan-Chan do arrive on the main continent. Did you have any last thoughts on the things that happen on a different continent before we go back to the one that we're used to?
I think the only other stray thought I have in my notebook is that it's weird that we think of like cold climate differences as going north. And so this would be very far west. It's colder, which doesn't seem to fit, right? Like there is like the hemisphere seasonal differences, but it doesn't seem to fit exactly how I expect analogous world. It's supposed to be our world to work. So I have some questions about that and how the breaking of the world might have caused all this craziness, and I'm sure you can't answer that.
It's worth noting, I actually can give at least some detail about this. It's worth noting on the main continent, things seem to work more or less northern hemispherically other than the blight, right? The southern part of the continent is really hot. The northern part of the continent is really cold. The only exception is that unlike on our Earth, the more north you get, the colder it gets forever. On this Earth, it seems that there is a line above which the blight exists and it gets hot again. My response to your question is I don't think they just went west, right? I wouldn't be surprised if they went west and a whole lot north. But I think you're right to be questioning, like, Seanchan is so new and different. Any of those options are definitely on the table. It could be massively mountainous and they're higher up than they expect, or it could be that they are way north on the continent, or it could be, as you're saying, maybe there is something about like the poles flip on the west side of the hemisphere or whatever, right? There's a bunch of options here. We don't know what any of them are. And that's kind of what's fun about this all new that we get here. But since it's all new, there's really nothing to tell us what to focus on.
Yeah, I yawned in the middle of that, listeners, but it wasn't in response to what Tyler was talking about. I'm just very tired. It's breaking season.
He's very passive-aggressive all the time. You never
yawn.
Get to experience it.
Sure. Give me all the options, Tyler. Thank you. Oh, yawn.
So I guess then my follow-up question is about a plot line that you have been completely uninterested in. But hey, some things happened in this plot line in the past 2 weeks. What are your thoughts on Rand and Aviendha as we now kind of leave that kind of dichotomy behind, right? We don't have that dyad to play along with in the same way we did before, and we don't really get to fully see where it's going to go, right? We get a few hints from Rand reading into Aviendha throughout the chapter, but I guess we're kind of left in a place where I have to ask you, what do you think happens the next time they encounter each other? Do you expect it to be friendly? Do you expect this to blow up in some way? Do you expect them to go back to their old kind of rivalry they had? Where are you seeing that dynamic after one chapter of little hints, but it's Rand interpreting what a woman thinks? We can't really think of him as a reliable narrator.
Well, it does feel like this is like, oh, this was different and special, and now we're just lumping it in with all the other Robert Jordan romances where people kind of hate each other but love each other, and that seems to be his primary dynamic. We've certainly given it plenty of credit that is how teenagers are, and I think that's still fair, that these are young people, and yes, they came together, no pun intended, but after that, then they have this kind of, she was so clear about like this isn't going to be a thing, and then it's like embarrassment that other people found out that quickly and so on. It just ended up feeling very high school for like the popular high school kids, not the nerds like me.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that, but I've watched enough teen dramas on television that I know there are one of two ways this can go, right? Either this is the will they, won't they forever, where Aviendha keeps saying no and we're not sure if it will ever be yes again, or this is the we will never do this again, and then every episode they slip up and do it on a television show, right? We don't know which it is yet, but this is a volatile dynamic if we are following along with how teen romances typically progress in this way. I thought the fun part about this was just seeing Rand like fumble around with what does it mean when the girl's not mad at me, but the time she was mad at me is when we got together. But I don't think there's anything else to say about that.
Seems right. And I just in response to your two options, I'm not sure which one I'm rooting for. I mean, listener of the pod, Ben, has made his case firmly that, and former guest of the show, Ben, that he's on Team Aviendha now. I think in this ongoing relationship, I was going to say triangle, but it's like a pentagon of some kind. So I'm not there yet. I don't dislike it. I feel very much like I did, and I think I've already said this about Jon Snow and Ygritte. It's like, oh, they seem to be good together. I like that dynamic, but I don't feel really invested in, like, I really hope it's her and not Elaine. I think I see so much in the Elaine connection for the kind of politics and the future of the continent that I see more potential there. But again, keeping both in the balance and also Min just means that like I think it's going to have to play out slowly, and Rand will probably eventually have to make a heart versus head, probably versus penis choice, as these choices tend to be.
I actually think that we should go with love parallelogram. I think that is our best of the options. I think that's really what we've got with Aviendha. I kind of love that romance because it's the only one that happens on screen of all of the major romances we've had so far, and I kind of buy why these characters would like each other, even as they have reasons not to be together. And then all we're left with in the rest of this chapter is this dude Asmodean, who it turns out actually kind of has Rand's back. It would have been very easy for him to just cut the gateway and let it close and have him try to walk away and no one notice he was gone. He did right by Rand, even though he kind of gave away Rand and Aviendha's secret unintentionally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not totally warm on it. I agree with you. That's what this chapter says. That's what the text says. But I still think of him a little bit as like a worm tongue figure that is, you know, latching on to the strongest person because they want to be safe in the shadow of the strongest person. And for now, that's Rand. And I think he thinks he's stronger with Rand than facing down Lanfear for his failures or what have you. So, so yes, he had his back. I agree. He could have just let it all fall, but I'm still not like, oh, he's a good guy now. What an upstanding dark friend.
Yeah, I buy that. You can go Forsaken. Dark Friend is a little too mild for Asmodean. I have two quick notes about things that he mentioned that I thought were really interesting. One is that Asmodean drops this detail that one of the things that Rand did here was an extremely rare weave that very few people know how to do, and the list was, I'm pretty sure it was Lanfear, I think it was Mogadien, it was one of the other male Forsaken, and it was Luz Theron. It was very limited who could do this, and that really makes me kind of wonder what is happening when Rand is doing these things by instinct, because we've heard him have voices a couple of times, and listening to voices feels bad, and doing magic the voices tell you to do feels extra bad.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm going to try to get all our franchises in tonight. It feels to me so much like those portions of Harry Potter where you thought Harry was just having doubts and then eventually you figure out, spoilers for late stage Harry Potter, that Voldemort's been living in his head and that some of those impulses are from that being a Horcrux, the accidental Horcrux. So, man, I just really went all for it, just uncalled for. So hopefully people have read Harry Potter or watched the movies. So I do feel like, yes, that is the lesson from books like this. Yet, as much as I know that intellectually, I'm like, yeah, just go with it because it's super cool and like be a badass. So
yeah, that's fair. The last note that I have is I think there's something very interesting about Rand's thinking in this chapter because he witnesses some really incredible, crazy stuff in the past chapter and a half. He sees Aviendha create a gateway for the first time in his life that goes somewhere without the intermediate, like halfway dimension that he had used previously. He is able to hold the gateway open. He sees Asmodean create an illusion, and at the end of all of that, when he realizes I can make Asmodean teach me things I didn't know were possible, what he asks for is the ability to dodge and destroy women's weaves. And I think that tells us a lot about Rand's headspace, that he has all of these options of what to ask for, and he's immediately choosing, I need to be able to defeat Damane. There's a part of me that worries about someone who has so many immediate concerns getting distracted by a trip to another continent. What are your thoughts on that kind of process of deciding what to ask Asmodean to teach him?
A lot of this was lost on me. I think again, every time Rand is kind of working through these things, the metaphor I continue to use is just like order of operations. And he, you know, like a good strategist is doing a threat index. And I think he sees the Shan-Chan as probably the most important threat, but the farthest away. I don't know if that's exactly right because he obviously is very concerned about the fight on this continent. I think I'm still thinking that Shan-Chan are less than the Dark One, right? And so I kind of assume that we'll have to settle this issue. Although we are still on the complete opposite side of the continent from where the Shan-Chan would be returning. I think we'd have to settle this issue before we get to the final confrontation, hence the name Final Confrontation. So I'm still working those pieces out, and I think Rand is too, but it seems like in this particular moment, he's like, well, this is the big one I got to be prepared for, or maybe the one I feel least prepared for. And I wonder if that could be related to prophecy, right? There's no prophecies about this versus prophecies about the final battle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about Rand's thought process, because so far we've been thinking a lot about like what of the leaps he's making are potentially gaps in logic and what of them are things that are informed by prophecy. And so bringing that into this, I think, makes a whole lot of sense. Any last thoughts on a short spear before we jump all the way across to the other side of the continent?
Just a note, I thought it was going to be about Matt, and I was completely wrong last week when I said, oh, short spear, it's got to be Matt. And so kudos. You tricked me, Robert Jordan, you devilish man.
I don't know why that made me laugh so much. Also, Matt's spear is extra long. Not a joke, somehow. Chapter 33, A Question of Crimson. Nynaeve is blindfolded as Tom throws daggers that narrowly miss her, obviously intentionally. She pulls out a couple of pears from her belt, and Tom throws knives through them as well, and then Luca tries to soothe her anger by calling her act the rose among the thorns. Luca continues to try to deflect her when she is yelling at him by complimenting her bravery, and then says she will look even better in the dress that has been made for her, and she hates the dress, thinking that it is far too revealing, and she hates even more when Tom suggests that he could be blindfolded as well as Nynaeve. She wants no part in that whatsoever. We learn that they have gotten some information from Egwene about what is going on in Cairhien, and we've learned about skirmishes going on outside of Cairhien, particularly from people who think that Rand is with the Aiel and so are trying to stop them from getting to the city. And we also learn that Lan has been participating in these, and that upsets Nynaeve quite a bit. We also learn that Nynaeve doesn't remember where they are going yet and is still trying very hard to figure out what the name of the city was, and she thinks that they haven't seen any large vessels approaching the village that they are near, which is apparently called Samara. She thinks that the prophet is in Samara, and this is causing an enormous amount of upheaval in the area. Nynaeve then makes her way towards the carnival camp, and she passes by Aludra, who is preparing some chemicals, and also the Chavanasses, who most of them are still occasionally flirting with her, which is quite problematic. Aludra apparently has created matches, which she is calling fire sticks, and Nynaeve takes them and thanks her for them and immediately throws them away, thinking they must be extremely dangerous. Julin then arrives with news that he has been in Samara, and he has seen a number of white cloaks there, including Galad. As Nynaeve arrives in her tent, Elaine exclaims at a black eye that Nynaeve more or less hasn't mentioned in the narration up to this point, and she apparently sustained an injury from Sarandon, the Shan-Chan. Nynaeve makes it seem as if she was sucker punched, but then as she explains that what actually happened is she pushed Sarandon too hard when questioning her about Damane, and eventually Sarandon basically destroyed Nynaeve in a fight, and it would have been even worse had the strongman not arrived and made Nynaeve apologize to Sarandon, something that Nynaeve does not mention in her description to Elaine. The subject then changes when Elaine says that she has been studying the Adam and she thinks that she could produce one. This causes Nynaeve to be upset because why would anyone want to make an Adam? But then Elaine says that she thinks she could likely make any Ter Angriel and even potentially an Angriel or a Sa Angriel, and she explains how monumentous this discovery would be because this hasn't been possible in quite some time. She is especially excited that the idea that she could potentially be creating something because she thinks that is something she really hasn't had an opportunity to do as a royal who doesn't actually kind of work with her hands and make things. Nynaeve is surprised by her enthusiasm, and Elaine seems extremely upset when she eventually learns that Galad is in town. She is confident, however, that Galad will never waste his time at something as silly as a menagerie, and they agree to leave on the first ship, but Nynaeve still cannot remember where they are trying to go. Yeah, that's a long summary for not a lot happening. What did you pull out of A Question in Crimson?
Geez, this was not one that impressed me. I mean, it's basically like everything continues on in the circus as it has. The forces of darkness are encroaching, and guess what? Elena's special too. It kind of felt like that was the big moment. The big message is, hey, we have one of our people who isn't like a chosen one is, guess what? A chosen one. And so I don't dislike any of the details that are revealed here, but it really just felt like, and this goes back to my comments at the top of the episode, it felt like just confirmation that they will eventually remember Solidara. I do think there's a space where they could just never remember and never go there, but it feels much more like, yes, we are still moving these characters closer to those other characters.
I'm really sorry, Greg, but if you are not interested in what color dress Nynaeve is going to wear when she does her performance, I don't think we can be hosting the same podcast anymore. We just have different opinions about what is important in literature. I'll be honest. This is a chapter that mostly works for me in the way that Nynaeve is a really interesting, unreliable narrator. I don't think there is actually any plot moment here that stands out, but there are a couple of places where Nynaeve, for example, doesn't mention that she just got her ass kicked like 5 minutes ago until halfway through the chapter, and I think that is the thing that really stood out to me, is more how Nynaeve is telling a very boring story instead of the actual story that is happening here. So I'm curious your thoughts on how we are told this, because I think the structure is actually the only real interesting thing about this chapter.
I have such a hard time kind of getting a good read on Nynaeve. She seems a little adrift at the moment, and I think this is because we've seen kind of all the things that did define her have slowly broken down, and that's kind of being the mother hen over the others. That kind of is gone, and one by one they've all challenged her authority and mostly won and kind of put her in her place. And then we get a reminder here that, you know, this relationship with Lan kind of defined her briefly, but that's kind of falling apart. You know, she's still got her braid and she can cross her arms under her breasts, but I don't know what else is going to define her kind of in this moment. And that's kind of how I feel like the narration just confirms that she's not even sure who she is in this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, that what is happening here is the internal narration is basically going on as if Nynaeve were still the boss of everyone and the most important person, and then the actual events that are happening in her life are the kind of things that happen to someone who definitely does not have main character energy. And so kind of waiting for her to figure that out and how does she resolve it is a fun little game, but I think it's the only fun little game in this chapter, right? We learn some details about what's going on in Cairhien. That's kind of fun. We learn that Galad is in town. That's interesting. We learn that, as you say, it turns out Elaine is special for reasons other than being pretty, but boy, are those the notes I have on this chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other compliment I'll pay this chapter is to say I do like this device Robert Jordan uses where we get the real version of events and then we hear the version that other characters kind of get through the rumor mill. Like, I just find that effective, and I think it is effective in both the ways it's supposed to be, that the world feels smaller and bigger at the same time, where you're like, yes, this isn't just like everybody has all the information, but it also is like, wow, when the events are this big, they spread really quickly, right? And totally makes sense. An Aiel invasion, bringing back the last war, would spread like wildfire to alert people to it. So it just really works for me as a device, and I like when there's just a little humor in it too, that we know things are off or the truth behind something. It just all works. But again, as I said at the top of the episode, it's like this one I was like, yep, more of the same, because we're still not getting any real action here. But okay, the act sounds like it's coming together. They're gonna put on a big show and save the theater. I can't wait.
Put on a Big Show and Save the Theater needs to be the entire plot of a Wheel of Time book. I would read that Wheel of Time book. I will note, we do actually get a big advance on one plot line that we have been tracking for hundreds and hundreds of pages. We have a resolution to a key plot point, Greg. Elaine is no longer flirting with Tom. And she's sassy about it when asked.
Yeah, and again, that was all ick to me. So it's like, yep, let's just move along. We'll all forget it. We'll all forget it happened. We've all flirted with somebody we shouldn't have. Just move along.
The next note I have is an itty bitty teeny tiny detail, but it's one that, like, my annoying having read weird spots in history makes me really have, like, spider sense going off. When Aludra is a woman who makes fireworks and also is making matches, boy, is she playing around with every single chemical that goes into black powder, and we need to be aware of this fact.
That's a very funny detail. Where I grew up in New Hampshire, one of the biggest employers was a match factory, and it was like, it was always just like you wait for the big fire every couple years that like a lot of people in town get injured by. It's not funny. I don't mean to be laughing, but it's like a reminder that in our refined modern society, it's still super dangerous. Yeah. So it fits in with this plot line.
Yeah. The last thing I have, literally in the entire chapter, is if we're talking about, boy, it might explode if Elaine ever makes fun of Nynaeve like that again, or boy, it might explode if we put Aludra's matches in the wrong place. Boy, it might explode if Elaine messes around with the wrong thing. Like, I know we're supposed to be really hopeful and just assume Elaine is the chosen one and can make whatever she wants, but the fact that her first thought of something to reproduce happened to be an Adam really makes me go, oh boy, what is she gonna want to make something of and make a mistake, and what problems is this gonna cause, right? I know this is an exciting, she has promise, but I don't think you get promise about an Adam without something negative coming along with it.
Well, and like the girls in the dream world, this feels like they're messing with forces that are much more powerful and that they shouldn't be messed with. So agreed. Yes, a kind of Chekhov's gun situation where you're like, oh, great, but also terrible. So we'll have to see where it goes.
So other than that, Nynaeve got punched in the eye, and I think that's a thing that maybe needs to happen more often if she's going to have a lot of character advancement. I think she's a great person, but like we all need to get punched in the eye a couple times in our adulthoods, and then we're better people for it. Any thoughts on this fight?
I think you just invited me to come punch you, so I'm going to just wrap up this conversation quickly, and we can punch each other in the eye to become real adults.
I actually lived in a pretty rough area of Michigan. I've been punched in the face enough times. I'm good for the rest of my adult life. You know what I'm not good with, though? The amount of Wheel of Time we've read. We need to keep going. We have 2 chapters next week. Chapter 34, A Silver Arrow, and Chapter 35, Ripped Away. And you know what, Greg? We've done a lot of temperature checks this book, and every time we've been like, it's fine, 3.5 stars. I'm pretty sure there is at least one major plot advancement in every one of the 12 weeks we have left in this book. Oof. They're not all going to be great chapters. I can't promise that. But something will happen every week from here on out. What do you expect to happen, and what are you looking forward to? We've got like 3 months left in this book.
You almost said through the glass columns, and we both know it. But what I'm laughing at the most is you asked me to rate the book at the beginning of this episode, and then you end the episode with an impression of my voice going like, I don't know, 3.5 stars. I feel like I'm getting bullied. I think I'm getting bullied on this podcast, so it's like a punch to the eye. I'm excited. I think I guess what I most want to see in the weeks to come is I actually want to see some war. I'm tired of the war happening in the background. I want our characters to get involved with some of these confrontations and some of these big fights because, you know, you can only ratchet up the tension before we got to really hit that pressure release and see some people kind of let loose and go wild. So So that's very exciting to me, and I'm encouraged that, again, the deeper we get into this book, we passed 50% and are headed really into the back half. I already told Tyler before we started recording I almost purchased the next book while I was out at a bookstore this week, but then he reminded me I have 12 weeks, so I can get to a bookstore again in that time. Before I log off, I'm going to abuse my privilege as being last on the mic just to say I'm putting in a huge amount of time on my movie podcast lately because it's award season. So if you like my analysis on this show and want to hear me talk about something I actually know about, then please check out I co-host a podcast called The Long Take Review. Wherever you get this podcast, you can get that podcast. And we really concentrate on awards movies this time of year. And boy, there are a lot of them. We just did The Substance and Anora and Blitz, and I snuck in some thoughts on The Brutalist and Nickel Boys, and we're about to see Gladiator, and I have to get Tyler a special popcorn bucket when I see it, and I have to get to Wicked because I think that's going to be an award contender, even though it's 3 hours, that's half a movie. So please justify my addiction and my devotion to these things by checking me out over there, and we'll get Tyler on that show at some point. I don't control who's guest.
The name of that podcast.
The Long Take Review. Anywhere you get this podcast, you'll get that one. So, all right. And if you like that, if you don't like that, either way, you'll have to put up with me next time through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.